Jake Morrison lay flat on his stomach behind a cluster of purple rocks. His green eyes watched the alien patrol through the scope of his rifle. The three Zephyrians moved slowly across the sandy ground of planet Kepler 442b. Their blue skin gleamed in the pale sunlight, and their crystal armor made soft clicking sounds as they walked. He had been hiding on this planet for 6 days now. His mission was simple but dangerous: get behind enemy lines, find their main communication base, plant explosives, get out alive. The last part was always the hardest. The Zephyrians stopped near a large boulder. One of them pointed at something in the dirt. Jake squinted through his scope and saw what had caught their attention. Boot prints, human boot prints, his boot prints. Damn, Jake whispered under his breath. The alien patrol leader spoke in their musical language. Jake did not understand the words, but he knew the tone. They had found his trail. Now they would follow it, and his trail led straight to his current hiding spot. Jake had two choices. He could try to run, or he could let them find him. Running meant crossing open ground for 2 miles before reaching the next good hiding spot. The Zephyrians were fast runners, and their energy weapons had long range. He would not make it. The second choice was more interesting: let them catch him. Act like a regular soldier who got lost, then find a way to escape later. It was risky, but Jake had done risky things before. He made his decision quickly. Jake crawled backward from his hiding spot and moved to a position where the aliens would easily find him. He wanted to look tired and defeated, not dangerous. The Zephyrians spread out as they followed his trail. They moved like trained soldiers, covering each other and checking for ambush. Jake had to admit they were good at this, but not good enough. He waited until they were close. Then Jake stood up slowly with his hands raised high. His rifle hung from its strap across his chest. He made sure to look scared and confused. "Do not shoot," Jake called out in English. He knew they had translation devices. "I surrender." The three aliens raised their energy weapons. The patrol leader spoke into a small device attached to his wrist. Calling for backup, Jake guessed. Standard procedure when capturing an enemy. Soldier. 2 more Zephyrians arrived within minutes. They came in a small flying vehicle that made almost no sound. Jake memorized everything about it. The way it moved, how it landed, where the controls might be. Information was always useful. The patrol leader approached Jake carefully. The alien was tall, maybe 7 feet, with long arms and large hands. His crystal armor covered most of his body, but Jake could see weak points where the pieces joined together. "Human soldier," the alien said through his translator. His voice sounded like music, even when speaking English. "You are now prisoner of the Zephyrian Empire." Jake nodded and tried to look relieved. "Thank you for not killing me," he said. "I have been lost for days. No food, very little water." This was partly true. He had been careful with his supplies. But Jake had enough training to survive for weeks if needed. Still, looking weak and helpless was part of his plan. The aliens searched him roughly but thoroughly. They took his rifle, his sidearm, and his combat knife. They found his emergency rations and water purification tablets. They also found his fake identification papers. "Corporal Danny Wilson, Terran Federation Marines," the patrol leader read from the papers. "Serial number 8479255536. Jake had memorized every detail of his fake identity. Danny Wilson was supposed to be a regular infantry soldier, young and inexperienced. The kind of prisoner who might talk under pressure. The kind who would not be considered especially dangerous. The real Jake Morrison was something very different. But the Zephyrians did not need to know that. Not yet. They bound his hands with energy restraints that glowed blue and felt warm against his skin. Jake tested them gently. Strong, but not impossible to break if he found the right way. Everything could be broken if you understood how it worked. The aliens loaded him into their flying vehicle. Jake sat between 2 guards while the pilot started the engines. The craft lifted smoothly into the air and began flying toward the horizon. Through the transparent walls, Jake could see the landscape passing below. Rocky hills, dried-up rivers, and the remains of what once had been cities. This planet had been beautiful before the war came here. Now, it was mostly empty except for soldiers and scavengers. The flight lasted about an hour. Jake used the time to study his captors, the way they moved, how they held their weapons, their body language when they talked to each other. He was learning their habits and finding their weaknesses. The Zephyrians were proud warriors. Jake could see that. They sat straight and kept their weapons ready. But they also seemed to think the hard work was done. They had caught their prisoner. Now they just had to deliver him. That attitude might be useful later. The flying vehicle landed at a military base built into the side of a mountain. Jake counted at least 20 buildings and 3 landing pads with various aircraft. More information. For his mental files, guards escorted him through several security checkpoints. Each time, different aliens scanned him with handheld devices and checked his fake papers. The routine was efficient but predictable. Jake filed away every detail. They brought him to a holding cell inside the mountain base. The room was small and plain, with metal walls and a hard bench. A force field hummed across the entrance instead of bars or a door. "You will wait here," the patrol leader told him. "Tomorrow you will be transferred to our main detention facility for questioning." Jake sat down on the bench and hung his head as if exhausted. "Can I have some water?" he asked weakly. One of the guards brought him a container of liquid that tasted like metal, but was probably safe to drink. Jake sipped it slowly while watching the aliens through his lowered eyelashes. When they left him alone, Jake allowed himself a small smile. The first part of his plan had worked perfectly. The Zephyrians thought they had captured a lost and frightened Marine named Danny Wilson. They had no idea they were now transporting Lieutenant Commander Jake Morrison, one of the most decorated Navy SEALs in the Terran Federation, a man who had destroyed 3 enemy bases single-handedly, a soldier who had once held off an entire alien battalion while civilians escaped to safety. The Zephyrians called him the Ghost in their intelligence reports, though they did not know his real name. They knew someone was sabotaging their operations behind enemy lines, someone who struck without warning and disappeared before they could respond. But they had never connected those attacks to any specific human. Jake stretched out on the hard bench and closed his eyes. Tomorrow they would move him to their detention facility. That was where the real mission would begin. His target was not this small base. His target was their main intelligence center where they kept their most important prisoners and their most sensitive information. Getting captured had been easy. Getting inside their most secure facility would be even easier since they would bring him there themselves. The hard part would come after that, but Jake had been preparing for hard parts his entire career. He had trained for situations exactly like this one. The Zephyrians thought they had won a small victory by capturing one human soldier. Soon they would learn how wrong they were. The transport ship was much larger than the flying vehicle that had brought Jake to the mountain base. This one was built for long-distance travel between planets. Jake sat in a holding area with metal walls and no windows. 2 guards watched him at all times. The journey to Zarian Prime took 3 days. Jake used every hour to gather information. He listened to the guards talking. He watched how they moved around the ship. He memorized the sounds the engines made and tried to figure out the ship's layout. The guards thought he was just a scared Marine who did not understand what was happening to him. They talked freely in front of him, forgetting that humans were good at learning languages. Jake picked up enough Cepharian words to understand basic conversations. From what he heard, Zarian Prime was their most important prison planet. Only. And the most valuable prisoners went there. The facility was supposed to be impossible to escape from. No one had ever gotten out alive. Jake found this information very interesting. When the ship finally arrived at Zarian Prime, Jake got his first look at the detention facility through a small window. It was enormous. Black metal buildings rose from the planet's surface like dark mountains. Energy barriers flickered between the structures. Guard towers dotted the perimeter. The facility looked designed to hold prisoners much larger and stronger than humans. This gave Jake some ideas about how to move around without being noticed. They processed him like any other prisoner. Guards took his clothes and gave him a gray uniform. They scanned his body with strange devices and took samples of his blood. They recorded his height, weight, and other measurements. Through it all, Jake acted like Danny Wilson, the frightened Marine. He answered questions with his fake name and serial number. He pretended not to understand what the aliens wanted from him. Finally, they brought him to his cell. It was larger than the holding cell at the mountain base, but just as bare. Metal walls, a hard bench, and a force field across the entrance. A small slot allowed guards to pass food and water through. Jake had been in the cell for 6 hours when his interrogator arrived. Commander. HFY was taller than the other Zephyrians Jake had seen. His crystal armor was more decorative, with extra pieces that showed his rank. His large eyes studied Jake with the look of someone who had broken many prisoners before. Human, HFY said in perfect English. I am Commander HFY. I will be asking you questions about your military forces. Jake looked up at him with what he hoped appeared to be confusion and fear. I do not know much, he said. I am just a regular soldier, HFY smiled. It was not a pleasant expression on his alien features. We will see about that. The first interrogation session lasted 4 hours. HFY asked questions about Terran Federation troop movements, base locations, and weapon capabilities. Jake gave him answers that sounded realistic but were completely useless. He told the alien about fake supply convoys and made-up patrol schedules. He described weapons that did not exist and mentioned commanders who were not real. Everything he said was believable but wrong. HFY did not seem satisfied with the answers, but he also did not seem suspicious. Many prisoners tried to lie during interrogation. The commander was patient. He believed he would break this human eventually. What HFY did not realize was that Jake was interrogating him right back. Every question the alien asked revealed something about what the Zephyrians knew and what they did not know. Every topic HFY brought up showed Jake what the aliens considered important. The interrogations continued for several days. HFY tried different approaches. Sometimes he was angry and threatening. Other times he acted friendly and offered Jake better food or more comfortable sleeping arrangements in exchange for information. Jake had been trained for this. The military called it SEER training. Survival, evasion, resistance, and escape. He had spent weeks learning how to resist. Interrogation techniques. Compared to what his own instructors had done to him, HFY was almost gentle. On the 4th day, HFY decided to try physical pressure. They moved Jake to a different room with bright lights that hurt his eyes. They made the room very hot, then very cold. They played loud noises that made it impossible to sleep. Jake endured it all without giving up any real information. He had been through much worse during his training, but he made sure to act like the discomfort was affecting him more than it really was. While pretending to suffer, Jake was actually studying the facility's security systems. He watched the guards through the bright lights. He listened to their conversations over the loud noises. He memorized their patrol schedules and noted when different shifts began and ended. The guards thought the human was breaking down under pressure. They did not notice that his green eyes were constantly moving. They did not see how he tracked their movements and counted their numbers. On the 7th day, HFY tried a new approach. He brought Jake to a room with a large window that looked out over the detention facility's main courtyard. Hundreds of prisoners from different alien species moved around in the open space. Look at them, HFY said. All of them thought they were strong. All of them thought they could resist us. Now they work in our factories and mines until they die. Jake stared out the window with apparent horror. But what he was really doing was studying the facility's layout. He could see guard positions, security cameras, and possible escape routes. The window gave him a perfect view of the facility's main weaknesses. You do not want to end up like them, HFY continued. Tell me what I want to know, and you can have better treatment. Good food, a comfortable cell, maybe even a job in the administrative section? Jake turned away from the window and looked at the floor. I told you everything I know, he said in a small voice. I am just a Marine. I do not know about secret plans or important bases. Vexai studied him for a long moment. "I think you are lying," the alien said finally. "But I am patient. Tomorrow we will try something different." They returned Jake to his cell. As he lay on the hard bench, he reviewed everything he had learned. The facility's security was strong, but not perfect. The guards followed predictable routines. Most importantly, they clearly did not expect much resistance from human prisoners. That night, Jake began working on the energy restraints they had put back on his wrists after the interrogation. He had been studying them for days, looking for weaknesses. The restraints were designed to contain much larger and stronger beings than humans. This meant they had more power than necessary, but also more complex systems that could potentially be disrupted. Jake started applying very small amounts of pressure to specific points on the restraints. Too much force would trigger alarms. But tiny, repeated stress in the right places might create microscopic cracks in the energy matrix. It would take time, maybe weeks. But Jake was not in a hurry. Each day brought him more information about the facility. Each interrogation session revealed more about Zephyrian military operations. Each night gave him more opportunities to work on his eventual escape. Meanwhile, Vexai was growing frustrated. He had broken prisoners from dozens of different species. Tough warriors, clever spies, and stubborn rebels had all eventually told him what he wanted to know. But this human marine seemed almost immune to pressure. The alien commander did not understand what he was dealing with. He thought Danny Wilson was just a very determined regular soldier. He had no idea that he was trying to break a man who had been trained by the most elite military forces in human space. Jake Morrison had survived interrogations that would have killed weaker people. He had been taught to resist torture techniques that Vexai had never even heard of. More importantly, he had been trained to turn any situation to his advantage. The Zephyrians thought they were slowly breaking down their human prisoner. In reality, their prisoner was carefully taking apart their entire security system from the inside. Jake had been in the detention facility for 10 days when everything changed. He was lying on his cell bench, working on the energy restraints with tiny movements that looked like nervous fidgeting. The microscopic cracks were growing slowly, but steadily the sound of new prisoners arriving echoed through the corridor. Jake heard guards shouting orders and the shuffle of feet. This happened every few days as more captives were brought to the facility. He usually paid little attention to new arrivals. This time was different. A familiar voice cut through the noise. "I said I can walk by myself. Get your hands off me." Jake sat up quickly. He knew that voice. Captain Lisa Hayes, one of the best fighter pilots in the Terran Federation. She had flown escort missions for Jake's transport ships twice before. What was she doing here? The guards brought Lisa to the cell next to his. Jake could hear them processing her through the thin metal wall. They asked the same questions they had asked him. Name, rank, unit assignment. Lisa gave them real answers. She was not undercover like Jake. When the guards finally left, Jake waited several minutes before speaking. The facility had listening devices, but he knew they were not always monitored. Late at night, with minimal staff, there might be a chance for careful conversation. "Lisa," he whispered just loud enough for her to hear. There was silence for a moment. Then her voice came back, equally quiet. "Who knows my name?" "Danny Wilson," Jake said, using his cover identity. "We met at the officers' club on Station Beta." Another pause. Jake could almost hear her thinking. Station Beta had been destroyed 3 months ago. Anyone who claimed to have been there recently was lying. But Jake was counting on Lisa being smart enough to realize he was sending her a message. "I do not remember you," Lisa said carefully. "I was there the night before the ghost hit the Covenant research facility," Jake continued. He was taking a big risk by mentioning his own operation. But he needed Lisa to understand who he really was. This time the silence lasted much longer. Jake knew Lisa was putting the pieces together. Danny Wilson was obviously not his real name. The reference to the ghost was specific enough that only someone with high security clearance would know about it. "My God," Lisa whispered finally. "Jake Morrison." Jake did not respond directly. The listening devices might pick up his real name, but Lisa's reaction told him she had figured it out. What Jake did not know was that 3 Zephyrian intelligence officers were monitoring their conversation from the facility's security center. The aliens had been hoping the 2 humans would share useful military information. Instead, they had just heard something that changed everything. Major Kethver, the senior intelligence officer, immediately began searching their databases for information about Jake Morrison. What he found made his blue skin turn even paler. Ghost of Titan Station, he read from the files. Suspected of destroying Covenant research. Facility 7 eliminated 43 enemy personnel during the evacuation of Colony World. Kepler 186b, believed responsible for sabotage of 3 major supply depots. The file continued for several pages. Jake Morrison was not just any Navy SEAL, he was one of the most wanted humans in Zephyrian space. Their intelligence services had been trying to identify the ghost for over a year. Major Kethver immediately contacted Commander Vexhai. The interrogator was sleeping in his quarters when the call came through. "Commander, we have a problem," Kethver said. "The human prisoner you have been questioning is not who he claims to be." Vexhai was fully awake in seconds. "Explain." "His real name is Jake Morrison. He is the operative our forces call the Ghost. Look at his file." Vexhai accessed the database from his personal terminal. As he read, his large eyes grew wider. The human he had been casually interrogating for 10 days was responsible for some of the most devastating attacks on Zephyrian operations. "This cannot be correct," Vexhai said. "He acts like a frightened Marine. He knows nothing about military operations." "He has been lying to you," Kethver replied. "Everything he told you was false information. He has been gathering intelligence while pretending to cooperate." Vexhai felt a chill run through his body. He thought back over all his interrogation sessions with the human. Every question he had asked, every piece of information he had revealed. While trying to break his prisoner, Jake Morrison now knew about Zephyrian interrogation techniques. He knew about the facility's security procedures. He knew which topics the aliens considered most important. Vexhai had been giving away military secrets while thinking he was extracting them. "Increase security around his cell immediately," Vexhai ordered. "Triple the guard shifts. Install additional monitoring equipment." "This human is extremely dangerous." "Yes, Commander." "Should we move him to maximum security?" Vexhai considered this. Maximum security would be safer, but it would also tell Jake Morrison that they had discovered his identity. If the human was planning an escape attempt, it might be better to let him think his deception was still working. "Not yet," Vexhai decided, "but watch him constantly. If he makes any suspicious moves, lock down the entire facility." Back in his cell, Jake had no idea that his cover was blown. He continued his quiet conversation with Lisa, being careful not to say anything that would reveal classified information. To the listening devices, "How long have you been here?" Lisa asked. 10 days, Jake replied. "They think I'm a regular Marine who got lost behind enemy lines. What about your mission?" Jake could not answer that question directly. His real mission was classified above Lisa's security level, but he could give her some hints. "I was looking for something when they caught me," he said. "Something important. I think I might have found it." Lisa was quiet for a moment. She knew Jake well enough to understand that he was not talking about his capture being accidental. Everything Jake Morrison did was planned. "Do you need help finding it?" she asked. "Maybe later," Jake said. "For now, just stay alert. Things might get interesting soon." Neither of them knew that their conversation was being analyzed by teams of Zephyrian intelligence experts. Every word was being studied for hidden meanings. Every pause was being examined for significance. The aliens were starting to understand that they had made a terrible mistake. They had not captured a regular human soldier. They had invited one of humanity's most dangerous operatives into their most secure facility. Commander Vexhai spent the rest of the night reading everything the Zephyrian military knew about Jake Morrison. The file painted a picture of a human who was more dangerous than entire enemy units. Jake Morrison did not just kill enemies. He turned their own systems against them. He used their technology and their tactics to destroy them from within. He was like a virus that infected enemy operations and destroyed them slowly from the inside. The most disturbing part of the file was how little they actually knew about him. Most of the information was based on guesswork and speculation. Jake Morrison operated so secretly that even his own military did not always know what he was doing. Vex High realized that he had been interrogating a man who probably knew more about covert operations than he did. While the alien had been trying to extract information, Jake had been conducting his own intelligence-gathering operation. As dawn approached on Zarian Prime, the detention facility's entire command structure was quietly alerting to a new threat level. Additional guards were called in from other duties. Security protocols were reviewed and strengthened. Emergency response teams were placed on standby, but it was already too late. Jake Morrison had spent 10 days learning everything he needed to know about their defenses. He had identified their weaknesses and developed countermeasures for their security systems. Most importantly, he now had an ally in the cell next to his. The Zephyrians had finally realized what they were dealing with. Unfortunately for them, their most dangerous prisoner was already 3 steps ahead of them. Jake continued working on his energy restraints with tiny, patient movements. The cracks were almost large enough now. Soon he would be ready for the next phase of his plan. The aliens thought they had caught the ghost. They were about to learn that ghosts were very hard to keep locked up. Jake had been working on the energy restraints for 2 weeks. The microscopic cracks were finally large enough. Tonight would be the night he put his escape plan into action. He had chosen 3 in the morning for his move. This was when the facility had the fewest guards on duty. Most of the staff worked day shifts, leaving only essential personnel during the night hours. Jake had counted exactly how many guards patrolled his section during different times. At 3 a.m., there were only 2. The first part of his plan required acting. Jake had been a soldier for 15 years, but tonight he needed to be an actor. He began making choking sounds and gasping for air. He rolled off his bench and onto the floor, clutching his throat. The sounds he made were loud enough to attract attention, but not so loud that they seemed fake. "Help," he called out weakly. "Cannot breathe. Something wrong." The first guard arrived within minutes. Through the force field, the alien could see Jake lying on the floor, his face red and his breathing shallow. The human appeared to be having some kind of medical emergency. "Get the medical team," the guard told his partner through his communication device. Jake continued his performance. He had studied the symptoms of severe allergic reactions during his medical training. The aliens had never seen a human having this kind of emergency, so they would not know what was normal and what was not. The medical team arrived quickly. 3 Zephyrian doctors with their scanning equipment and emergency supplies. They looked concerned as they studied the human through the force field. "We need to examine him directly," the lead doctor said. "Lower the barrier," the guard hesitated. "He is a dangerous prisoner. We have orders to maintain maximum security. He will die if we do not treat him immediately," the doctor replied. "Do you want to explain to Commander Vex High why his most important prisoner died during your shift?" The guard made his decision. He lowered the force field. The moment the barrier disappeared, Jake stopped acting. He moved faster than the aliens thought any human could move. His hand struck the first guard's throat in exactly the right spot to make him fall unconscious. The second guard reached for his weapon, but Jake was already there. The fight lasted less than 30 seconds. Jake had trained for years in hand-to-hand combat against different alien species. He knew where to hit Zephyrians to disable them. Quickly and quietly. All 5 aliens were unconscious before any of them could raise an alarm. Jake quickly stripped one of the guards and put on his armor. The fit was not perfect, but it would work well enough in dim lighting. He took the guard's weapon and communication device. "Lisa," he whispered to the cell next to his. "Time to go." "About time," Lisa replied. "I was starting to think you had forgotten about me." Jake disabled her cell's force field using the guard's control device. Lisa stepped out and looked at the unconscious aliens scattered around the corridor. Nice work, she said. What is the plan? First, we free the other human prisoners, Jake said. Then we get to the communication center and the main computer core. I need to download their intelligence files before we leave, Lisa nodded. She had suspected that Jake's mission involved more than just escaping. How many other humans are? Here? 63, Jake replied. I've been keeping count during my walks to interrogation. They are spread across 4 different cell blocks. They moved through the facility like shadows. Jake had memorized the guard patrol schedules and knew exactly when each corridor would be empty. The few guards they encountered were taken down quickly and silently. The first group of human prisoners was in cell block C. Most of them were military personnel who had been captured during various battles. When Jake opened their cells, they could hardly believe what they were seeing. Lieutenant Morrison? One of them said, "Sir, we thought you were dead." "Not yet," Jake replied. "But we will be if we do not move fast. Follow me and stay quiet." The group grew as they moved through the facility. Cell Block D held 20 more humans, including several pilots and a few engineers. Cell Block F had another 18 prisoners. Mostly Marines and Navy personnel. By the time they reached Cell Block G, Jake was leading a small army of freed prisoners. But he knew the hardest part was still ahead. Getting out of the detention cells was only the beginning. "Listen carefully," Jake told the group. "This facility has multiple levels and hundreds of guards. We cannot fight our way out with stolen weapons. We need to be smart about this." He divided the prisoners into teams. Some would secure the facility's communication center to prevent the aliens from calling for reinforcements. Others would plant explosives in critical systems to create confusion during the escape. "What about you?" Lisa asked. "I am going to the main computer core," Jake said. "The intelligence files stored there are worth more than all our lives. If I can get that information back to Earth, it could end this war." Lisa understood. The mission always came first for Jake Morrison. Even his own survival was secondary to completing his objectives. The team split up and moved toward their targets. Jake and Lisa headed for the facility's central tower, where the main computer core was located. This was the most heavily guarded area of the entire prison. They reached the tower without being detected, but Jake knew their luck would not last much longer. The unconscious guards in the cell blocks would be discovered soon. When that happened, the entire facility would go into lockdown. The tower had 6 levels. The computer core was on the top floor. Jake and Lisa had to climb past multiple security checkpoints and guard stations. They moved carefully, using ventilation shafts and maintenance corridors whenever possible. On the 4th level, they encountered their first serious resistance. A patrol of 4 guards was conducting a routine security check. Jake signaled for Lisa to wait while he handled them. The fight was quick, but not quiet. The guards' energy weapons made distinctive sounds when they fired. Jake managed to take them all down, but not before one of them activated an emergency alarm. Suddenly, the entire facility was bathed in red light. Sirens wailed from speakers throughout the complex. Automated voices announced in multiple languages that the facility was in lockdown. "So much for stealth," Lisa said. "It was going to happen eventually," Jake replied. "Now we move fast." They ran up the remaining stairs to the computer core. The door was sealed with multiple security locks, but Jake had taken an access card from one of the guards. The door slid open to reveal a room filled with massive computer systems and data storage units. Jake immediately began downloading files to a portable storage device he had taken from the guard station. The data transfer would take several minutes, but these files contained everything the Zephyrians knew about human military capabilities and their own strategic plans. While Jake worked at the computer terminal, Lisa watched the door for incoming guards. She could hear footsteps and shouting voices getting closer. The aliens were responding to the emergency with impressive speed. "How much longer?" Lisa asked. 3 minutes, Jake replied without looking up from the terminal. "We might not have 3 minutes. Energy weapon fire erupted in the corridor outside. The other prisoner teams were engaging the guards, trying to buy Jake the time he needed. The sound of the battle was getting closer. Got it, Jake said finally. He pocketed the storage device and grabbed several data crystals from the computer. Core, now we get out of here. But when they reached the door, they found their path blocked by a dozen Zephyrian guards in full combat armor. The aliens had finally organized an effective response to the prison break. Commander Vexai stepped forward from behind the guards. His large eyes were filled with anger and grudging respect. Jake Morrison, he said. The ghost reveals himself. At last, Jake smiled and raised his stolen energy weapon. Hello, Commander. Thanks for the hospitality. Now, if you will excuse us, we have somewhere else to be. The final battle for the detention facility was about to begin. The corridor became a battlefield in seconds. Jake and Lisa dove for cover behind a computer terminal as energy weapons lit up the room with bright flashes. The Zephyrian guards advanced slowly, their crystal armor reflecting the weapon fire. Like deadly rainbows. Commander Vexai stayed back while his soldiers moved forward. He had read Jake Morrison's file many times over the past few days. The human was dangerous, but he was still just one man against 12 trained warriors. What Vexai did not understand was that Jake had never planned to fight his way out through the front door. Lisa, cover me, Jake shouted over the sound of energy weapons. He pulled a small device from his belt and activated it. The device had been hidden in his boot during his entire captivity. The guards had missed it during their searches because it looked like a normal piece of metal. The device was a high-powered electromagnetic pulse generator. Jake had built it from parts he had stolen during his walks to interrogation sessions. Small pieces of wire, tiny power cells, and electronic components that the aliens thought were harmless. Jake threw the device toward the guards and covered his eyes. The MP blast disabled their energy weapons and their armor's power systems. In the sudden darkness, the Zephyrians became confused and disoriented. Jake moved through the chaos like a ghost. His training had taught him to fight in complete darkness using only sound and movement. The aliens stumbled around, trying to understand what had happened to their equipment. Within minutes, all 12 guards were unconscious. Commander Vexai found himself alone, facing a human who seemed to appear and disappear like smoke. Impossible, Vexai whispered. You are just one man. One man can be enough, Jake replied, stepping out of the shadows. If he knows what he is doing. Vexai reached for his backup weapon, but Jake was already moving. The alien commander joined his guards on the floor, unconscious but alive. Jake did not kill unnecessarily, even enemies who had tried to break him. Impressive, Lisa said, stepping over the fallen guards. But we still need to get out of here. This place will be crawling with reinforcements soon. Jake nodded and led her toward a maintenance shaft he had spotted during his earlier reconnaissance. The shaft connected to the facility's main ventilation system, which would take them to the hangar bay. As they crawled through the narrow passages, Jake could hear the sounds of battle throughout the facility. The other prisoner teams were fighting their way toward the rendezvous point he had designated. Some would make it, others would not. That was the harsh reality of military operations. The ventilation shaft opened into the facility's main hangar bay. Jake counted 6 alien spacecraft of various sizes. The largest was a transport ship capable of carrying all the escaped prisoners. It would be their way off this planet, but the hangar was heavily guarded. At least 30 Zephyrian soldiers had taken defensive positions around the spacecraft. They were expecting the escaped prisoners to head for the hangar, and they were ready. Jake studied the situation carefully. A direct assault would fail. They needed a different approach. Can you fly one of those ships? Jake asked Lisa. The transport. Yes, she replied. The controls are similar to captured vessels I have trained on. But we will never reach it with all those guards. Jake smiled. Watch and learn. He had saved one more surprise for this moment. During his interrogation sessions, Jake had planted small explosive charges in critical locations throughout the facility. The charges were made from common cleaning chemicals that he had mixed together during his cell time. The aliens had not noticed because the individual components were harmless. Jake activated the charges using a timer he had built into his fake identification papers. The explosions were not large, but they were placed in exactly the right spots to cause maximum chaos. The facility's main power grid failed first. Emergency lighting kicked in, but it was much dimmer than normal. Then the communication systems went down, preventing the guards from coordinating their response. Finally, the environmental systems failed, filling many areas with smoke from damaged ventilation units. In the confusion, Jake and Lisa slipped into the hangar bay. The guards were trying to understand what was happening to their facility. They did not notice two figures moving through the shadows toward the transport ship. The other prisoner teams began arriving at the hangar as planned. They came in small groups, using different routes to avoid the guard patrols. Jake had trained them well during their brief time together. Captain Roy Chun, a Marine officer who had been captured 3 months earlier, reached the transport ship. "First, sir, we have 42 people ready to go," he reported to Jake. "The others did not make it." Jake felt a moment of sadness for the prisoners they had lost, but there was no time to mourn. The facility's backup systems were starting to come online. Soon, the aliens would regain control of their security systems. "Get everyone aboard," Jake ordered. "Lisa, start the engines." "We leave in 2 minutes." The escaped prisoners moved quickly into the transport ship. Jake stayed outside until the last person was aboard, then sealed the hatch and headed for the cockpit. Lisa was already working at the pilot controls. "The ship is ready," she said, "but the hangar doors are sealed." "The lockdown system is still active?" Jake had anticipated this problem. He pulled out his stolen access card and plugged it into the ship's computer system. Using the guard's security codes, he began overriding the hangar's lockdown protocols. The massive doors slowly began to open, revealing the star-filled sky of Zarian Prime, but their escape had not gone unnoticed. Alarm sirens were wailing throughout the facility, and Jake could see armed guards running toward the hangar. "Go, go, go!" Jake shouted. Lisa fired the engines and the transport ship lifted off from the hangar floor. Energy weapon fire erupted from the guard positions, but the ship's shields absorbed most of the damage. As they rose into the planet's atmosphere, Jake could see the full extent of what they had accomplished. The detention facility was in chaos. Fires burned in several buildings. Guards ran in all directions, trying to restore order. The supposedly impregnable prison looked like a war zone, but Jake was not finished yet. He had one more surprise for the Zephyrians. He activated the final set of charges he had planted during his captivity. These were larger explosives hidden in the facility's main power reactor and data storage centers. The explosions lit up the night sky like artificial suns. The detention facility that had held thousands of prisoners was now a burning ruin. More importantly, all the intelligence data the Zephyrians had collected over years of operations was destroyed. It would take them months to rebuild their information networks. As the transport ship entered hyperspace, Jake finally allowed himself to relax. The mission was complete. They had escaped from the most secure prison in Zephyrian space, freed dozens of human prisoners, and dealt a devastating blow to enemy intelligence operations. Captain Chen approached Jake in the ship's main cabin. "Sir, how did you plan all of this? You were only captured 2 weeks ago." Jake smiled. "I was not captured, Captain. I was inserted. This entire operation was planned from the beginning." The other prisoners stared at him in amazement. They had thought Jake Morrison was just lucky. Now they realized they had witnessed a master at work. "The Zephyrians wanted to capture a human soldier," Jake continued, "so I gave them one. They wanted to interrogate me for information, so I let them try. What they did not realize was that I was interrogating them right back." Lisa looked up from the pilot controls. "What about the intelligence data you downloaded?" Jake patted the storage device in his pocket. "Complete Zephyrian fleet positions, supply routes, and strategic plans for the next 6 months. Command will be very interested in this information." The war would indeed end 6 months later, just as Jake had predicted. The intelligence he had gathered allowed the Terran Federation to launch a series of devastating preemptive strikes that crippled the Zephyrian military, but that was still in the future. For now, Jake Morrison sat quietly in the transport ship, already planning his next mission. The galaxy was a dangerous place, and humanity needed protectors who could operate in the shadows. The legend of the ghost would continue to grow, and the enemies of Earth would learn to fear the quiet, deadly competence of humanity's elite warriors.